Hi and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Supergrads. My name is Abhyansh Sir and I'm back with another YouTube live session that is on concepts that are often repeated in your IPMAT examination, especially the grammar topics that we're talking about. Today's discussion is around conditionals. Now, the moment I say conditionals, so I'm not here to teach what conditionals are. Of course, I'll give you a brief idea how conditionals works, what is zero conditional, what is first conditional. बट आई ऑल्सो टॉक अबाउट टू वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट कंडीशनल्स जिसके क्वेश्चंस आपको आईपीमैट इंदौर एग्जाम में हमेशा रिपीट होते दिखते हैं. प्लस व्हेन वी स्टडी समथिंग, the next thing that we focus on is the practice part. So we will practice around 6 to 8 questions as well, and we will have a detailed discussion of how these conditions can be there in the exam center. So I hope everyone is ready. I hope everyone is excited. Just give me a confirmation in the chat section that we are ready to begin. So what are conditionals, students? As the name suggests, कुछ conditions है. A condition needs to be fulfilled for the other action to complete. So the other action is dependent on the conditional part. There is one part in a sentence that is conditional. So आप इसे नंबर वाइज भी पढ़ सकते हो, दैट इज जीरो कंडीशनल, फर्स्ट कंडीशनल, सेकंड कंडीशनल, और यू कैन आल्सो स्टडी दिस एज universal truths, as future conditional, as past conditional, as imaginary sentences. So there are two different ways of dealing with such questions in the exam center. It's time I move to the first one that we have for today's session, that is zero conditional, students. Now, zero conditional mein there is no possibility of an action happening, there is no probability, there is no likeliness of an action taking place. As the name suggests, zero conditional है, मतलब कोई condition नहीं है. When I say कोई condition नहीं है, I mean the action will take place 100 out of 100 times. The action will take place 100 out of 100 times. Now what do I mean by that? So zero conditional का structure होता है, you have the conditional word. If is your conditional word, students. If is your conditional word. Plus present simple, and the other part is also in present simple. That means it's all about the verbs. Even when we are studying conditional sentences, students, I always emphasize the fact that verbs are the most important things in English grammar. English में ABCD of course सबसे important होता है, but once we are done learning the ABCD वाला part, the next and the most important thing, that is the gateway to grammar, as I say, is the correct usage of verbs, students. So if I look at this part now, to express facts or things that are always true, this adverb tells you everything. It says things or situations that are always true. If you don't study, you fail. You will fail nahi hoga. If you don't eat anything, you feel hungry. It is that simple. ऐसा नहीं होगा कि आप नहीं खा रहे हो और hunger आएगा या नहीं आएगा. There is no possibility. There is no 50-50. There is no 80-20 about it. These are the situations where there is 100% surety of an action taking place about it. This is something that will happen 100 out of 100 times. So this is how you use zero conditional, students. This is how you use zero conditional. This is our first sentence. This is our first type of conditional that we are talking about. Moving forward, the next conditional that we have, or as they say, is first conditional. So पूरे conditional part में, of course, there are 4 type of conditional sentences. As I said, there are 2 that are super important. Number 1 being past conditional, number 2 being this one, the first conditional, or like I call it future conditional, because when there are 2 actions of the future taking place one after the other, the dependent part will have will plus V1 and the conditional part will always have V1 with it. I know you might be a little confused क्योंकि सिर्फ थ्योरी बता देना and expect करना कि थ्योरी पूरा यहाँ चला जाएगा, that would be too harsh to students. So it's time I tell you with example. So if plus present simple tense, and the second part will have will plus base. So this is your conditional part. इसमें दो part होते हैं students. Number one is the conditional part, and number two is the dependent part. So you have a conditional part and a dependent part, students, to express possible future actions or outcomes. If it rains tomorrow, we will cancel the trip. So the action of going on a trip or not depends on whether it rains or not. So पहले rain होगा, उसके बाद cancellation होगा. That means the action that takes place first, the condition that needs to be fulfilled first, will have only simple present tense, and the dependent part is written in future tense. The dependent part is always written in future tense. If you study hard, you will pass. So the action of a person passing in the examination is dependent on the fact whether he studies hard or not. These are two examples. I know two examples are not enough. I'll come up with more, students. I'll come up with more examples for this first conditional. We will rest. We will rest for some time. When we will reach the top. So if I write something, write a sentence like this, students. Now here I have to see कौन सा will यहाँ पे correct है, कौन से will को हटाना है, कौन से will को eliminate करना है. So the conditional word here is when. So the action of these people taking rest depends. The action will they will take rest when they reach the top. So the first action is reaching the top. Is reaching the top. So here the usage of will is incorrect because this is conditional part. This is the conditional part, and rest hoga ya nahi hoga, this is dependent, students. This is dependent part. This is dependent part. So that is how you use future conditional. आप इसे कई नाम दे सकते हो. It can be future conditional, it can be first conditional. All that matters here is the dependent part will have will plus v1, and the conditional part is always written in simple present tense. That was, my dear students, our second conditional. The next conditional that we have is imaginary situation. Imaginary situation. So what do we do in such imaginary, unreal, hypothetical futures? So if plus past simple plus would plus base verb, and past simple भी हमेशा were use होता है. If we talk about helping verb, so the helping verb should always be were. To talk about hypothetical situation, I do not call it second conditional. मैं इसे ऐसे लिखना चाहता हूँ, students. I call it imaginary sentences. Imaginary sentences. Now the moment I say imaginary, I mean we imagine ourselves to be in such situations जो अभी exist नहीं कर रहे. Like अगर मैं मोदी जी की जगह होता, so I would have thrown numerous bombs at Pakistan. But आप हो तो नहीं. You're imagining yourself to be in someone else's shoes. So that is what imaginary sentences are. Now, though they are imaginary sentences, that doesn't mean कि आप कैसा भी grammar use कर लो, कैसा भी structuring use कर लो. That is not the case. So आपको करना क्या है? Though they are imaginary sentences, they still follow a proper structure, and the structure here is were, would, and v1. Were, would, v1 ये imaginary situations में आपको structure follow करना होता है. So if I go through some of the examples, if I were rich, I would travel the world. So irrespective of what your subject is, the helping verb should always be were. Modal verb would be would. And with all the modal verbs, we use first form of the verb. So if I were rich, I would travel the world. I'll come up with Some more examples, students. If I write, if I were a bird, I would fly in the sky. If I write another example, students, if Mahatma Gandhi, if Mahatma Gandhi were alive, he would eradicate poverty. So if you look at these sentences, अब यहाँ पर कुछ बहुत ज्यादा बचता नहीं है. These are imaginary situations. I'm not a bird, but I'm imagining. I'm saying if I were a bird, मैं आसमान में उड़ रहा था. So it would be I would fly and not I would have flown or any other structure like that. That is incorrect. Similarly, if Mahatma Gandhi were alive, alive hai to nahi, but the structure that you need to keep in mind, students, is the combination of were, would, and V1. Were, would, and V1, students. So irrespective of what your subject is, the structure that you follow should be were, would, and V1, students. ये structure follow हो रहा है, that means the sentence is grammatically correct. Mahatma Gandhi being singular, but that doesn't make any difference because the helping verb is always were in such situations in imaginary sentences. Modal verb is would and main verb ka first form. So this sentence is also grammatically correct. So that is how you use, that is what imaginary sentences or hypothetical situation is. Moving on to our last type of conditional, students, and this is something that is super important as far as exams are concerned. आप मेरी बात मत मानो. You go back and see previous year questions of IPMAT Indore. You will see there are many questions of past conditional. I say that this is past conditional, इसको third conditional बोलते हैं. Unreal past, something of the past that you wish to change. That is what past conditional is. तो इसको आप third conditional या past conditional नाम से याद रख सकते हो. Third conditional or past conditional, that is what you call it. So if structure क्या होता है, if then you have past perfect, that is had plus v3, उसके बाद would have and v3, would have and v3. This is how the structure of past conditional looks like to express regrets or situations that didn't happen, or like my way of putting this in very simple words is that when you have situations of the past that you wish to change, that is where you use past conditional. यार मुझे 10th क्लास में पता होता कि मैथ्स इतना टफ है, आई वुड नॉट हैव टेकन मैथ्स, आई वुड नॉट हैव टेकन पीसीएम इन क्लास 11th इफ आई हैड नोन. अब मैं कर तो कुछ नहीं सकता, इट इज समथिंग दैट हैज हैपेंड इन द पास्ट. सो इफ आई लुक एट दीज सेंटेंसेस, स्टूडेंट्स, if she had studied, she, then you have had plus v3, and then would plus have plus v3, would have v3. If we had left earlier, we wouldn't have missed the bus. So again, had plus v3 and would plus have plus v3. एक और एग्जाम्पल बताता हूं, एक बड़ा बेसिक सा एग्जाम्पल लेते हैं स्टूडेंट्स. If I had known your house was so far, I would have hired a cab. So if you look at this sentence, students, कोई पर्सन है भाई अपने फ्रेंड के घर पहुंचता है और कहता है यार मुझे पता होता घर इतना दूर है तो कैब कर देता है, एंड ही इज आल्सो हफिंग एंड पफिंग, ही इज ऑल स्वेटी बिकॉज पैदल चल के आया है ऑफ कोर्स. So something of the past that he wishes to change is where we use past conditional. So if I had known, again had plus v3, ये correct है, and then you have would plus, I beg your pardon, would plus have plus v3. So would have and v3, this is also correct. So that is exactly what past conditional is. And पूरे conditional sentence में if you want कि sir sum up कर दो important क्या है, what are those concepts that are repeating in the examination, I would say past conditional is the most important. और उसके बाद future conditional, that is one sentence being a condition and the other one being dependent on something to happen. So ये दोनों concepts conditional sentences के, ये दोनों concepts students एग्जाम में बहुत रिपीट होते हैं, but no theory is good theory unless we practice a few questions. So let's just summarize what we have studied, and then we can that did you know what is super important? So exam point of view से आप देखने जाओगे, so I would say past conditional is super important, and future conditional aka first conditional. Future conditional, also known as first conditional. So this is exactly what did you know? यहाँ पे of course we are discussing the crux of the session, the important conditionals. So these are the ones which are repetitive in the exam. I'll try and cover this in a rectangular box. And here it is, students. So these are very important. Past conditional का structure मैं आपको फिर से लिख देता हूँ. It could be if plus had plus v3, या कभी कभी ये directly भी ऐसा हो जाता है had plus subject plus v3. In which part you use this? In a part that you wish to change, plus the dependent part would be would plus have plus v3. Structure बड़ा important है. And when we talk about future conditional, the conditional part is always in simple present tense. मतलब वहां पे will नहीं होता है, वहां पे कोई भी conditional word नहीं होता है. And the dependent part should have will plus v1. So that is the entire crux of what conditionals are and which conditionals are important, which are those conditionals that are repetitive in the previous years in IPMAT Indore examination. It's time we practice a few questions. It's time we implement these things. So here is one of the questions that I wish कि आप इसका correct answer बताएंगे. Here is your first question, students. Here is your first question. So if I look at this sentence, students, यहाँ पे मुझे देखना है whether this is what can be replaced here. So when you go back and see papers of IPMAT Indore, IPMAT Indore में आपको ऐसे ही questions दिखते हैं for grammar students. You see similar questions of sentence correction when we talk about IPMAT Indore. So for such a question, सिर्फ वहाँ पे IPMAT Indore के साथ year लगना बचा हुआ है. All we can say you can expect such questions in 2026. If you're preparing for 2027, you will have such questions of past conditional. Now, if the company had realized the extent of market demand earlier, they have allocated more resources to product development last year. So this is something that has taken place in the past, and the company wishes to change. कि यार अगर मुझे पहले पता होता तो I would have done something else. So what do we need here? We need past perfect in the conditional part, that is had plus V3, and the part that you wish to change will have would plus have plus V3. So had realized and would have V3 मुझे कहां पर दिख रहा है students? Would have V3 मुझे दिख रहा है यहाँ पे. If the company had realized the extent of the market demand earlier, they would have allocated more resources to the product. So ऐसा question अगर आप एग्जाम में past conditional पढ़े बिना चले गए, and of course if you've not seen one of my videos, this video that I'm talking about, conditionals बहुत अच्छे से मैंने आपको इस वीडियो में समझाया है. And at the same time conditionals में भी अगर मैं segregation करने जाऊं, if I am to choose one among the four, I would say past conditional exam point of view से बहुत important है, क्योंकि previous year questions में previous year papers में आप देखोगे past conditional से question आते हैं. So that was our first question, students, for the session. Again another question from past conditional. ऐसे ही underline part वाले questions आपको exam में दिखते हैं. So I expect everyone to answer this question. Now let's look at the sentence. So if Sarah has pursued her degree in engineering, she may be working on innovative projects instead of being stuck in a routine jobs. So it talks about continuation, students. So pehla part would be had plus V3 and the second part would be would plus have, plus they want continuation, so we can have verb ing form as well. So had pursued, मुझे देखना had pursued यहाँ लिखा है, यहाँ लिखा है. Now, if I look at the other parts, I think this would be correct. Would have been working instead of being stuck in a routine job. अगर यहाँ पे present tense लिखा होता कि at the moment or now, so in that case it should have been would be. So part D of the sentence is what we will use to replace the underlined part, and you have such questions. Sentence correction के questions आपको IPMAT Indore में हमेशा दिखते हैं. So again, one of those questions from past conditional, super important, students. Here is your next question. Similar conditional but on different lines. यहाँ पर आपको MCQ format, fill in the blank format में अगर ऐसा question दिखता है, how would you answer such a question? So you dash the job by now if you had applied last month. So conditional part ये है कि अगर last month apply कर दिया होता तो अभी job मिल जाता. So would plus have plus V3. Where do you see that? You see that, students, in only option C. You would have had the job if you had applied last month. So again, something of past conditional. And like I said, one of the important concepts, one of the most repetitive concepts in IPMAT Indore exam. So this was another question, MCQ based question. Next, again, एक और question, students, on past conditional. I want you guys to get fully inured to what past conditional is. Past conditional का structure क्या होता है, मैं चाहता हूँ सारी चीजों से आप used to हो जाओ. So they dash the match if the referee hadn't made that mistake. So again, hadn't made, this is past perfect, had plus V3, ये भी past conditional ही है. So if they would have won, would plus have plus V3. Would have in V3, this is used in the part of the past that you wish to change. Match आप जीत जाते. Conditional part will always have will always add had plus V3, that is past perfect. So that was one of the questions. Moving on, students, to another question. Let's see if you can crack this one. कौन सा conditional यहाँ पर use हुआ है? That is what you need to identify in this sentence. That is what you need to identify in this sentence. So if the government implements the proposed environmental reforms within the next quarter, which includes stricter emission regulation and incentives for clean energy, several industrial sectors dash significant operational changes by the end of fiscal year. So this is past conditional कि अगर government ने कोई चीज implement कर दी, so the other action is dependent, and the dependent part will always have will plus V1. So it should be will have to undergo significant operational changes by the end of fiscal year. So you can say this is not a question that has been there in the previous years, but a sample question. आप अगर ये बोलते हो मुझसे कि सर मैंने फ्यूचर कंडीशनल अच्छे से पढ़ लिया है, so you should be able to tackle such questions irrespective of the length of the question. Question छोटा है, question lengthy है, आपको क्या फर्क पड़ता है? आपने रूल सीखा, आपने इम्प्लीमेंटेशन सीखा, that is what matters. So this was one question, students, on you could say future conditional. Here is the next question. Another sample question. Another sample question on future conditional. If the university announces its decision to shift to a blended learning model before the new semester begins, students from remote regions who rely heavily on hostel accommodations and campus resources dash to reassess their academic plans accordingly. So if the university does something, students adapting themselves is dependent on whether the university does that. So agar university implement karega, students will need to reassess their plans or accordingly. So this is again, you could say first conditional or future conditional. Conditional sentences may, if there is something which is super important, I will keep emphasizing the fact कि future conditional and past conditional are the ones जिस पे आने वाले years में भी exam में आपको questions दिखेंगे. This has been repetitive for the last 4-5 years. That brings us to the last question of today's session on conditionals. Here is your question, students. Now the conditional word here is provided. So provided the research team submits its preliminary findings to the ethics committee by the stipulated deadline, which includes a comprehensive methodology and risk assessment, the board dashed the full-scale experiment to proceed as scheduled. So the board will allow. Again, you could say first conditional, students. First conditional, or like I say, future conditional. And bacha bati, that's a wrap for today's session. So we are done with conditionals. थोड़ा सा मैंने आपको conditionals का brief दिया, and two most important conditionals जिससे बार बार exam में questions repeat हो रहे हैं. It's time I say goodbye to you. Do tell me in the comment section आपको session कैसा लगा. I'll be back tomorrow at the same time with the most important concepts of one of my favorite topics, that is subject verb agreement. So that's all for today. See you guys tomorrow, same time. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.